So, why do we work? Now, if you ask almost anyone, you'll get the same answer. Because we have to. Rent, food, bills, necessity.
If you win, what are you doing with the money?
I'm not going back to work.
If I were to win that, I'd probably hire somebody to go in and clean out my desk.
I work currently at Mercy Medical Center. I've called them and told them I will not be coming back.
But underneath that answer sits a theory of human nature so widely held that actually nobody ever thinks of it as a theory at all. Which is, if people didn't have to work to survive, they wouldn't. If you take away the pressure, all they'll do is nothing.
I'm not a fan of universal basic income. It's like saying you have nothing to contribute to society, so we're just going to pay you to do nothing.
And it's stated like this kind of universal law of human nature, which is just so frustrating because it's a factual, checkable claim about human behaviour. So, let's test it. So anytime anyone proposes a safety net, right, a shorter week, a basic income, people say this.
I don't believe redistribution is a good in its end.
Why?
Well, why should I? You explain to me why I should think this is a good thing.
Well, if you're redistributing wealth, it's almost like a utilitarian thing to do.
Why is that?
Because more people are benefiting than the 1% of the rich people.
How are they benefiting?
They're able
when you take away their incentive to work. You think that redistributing is an end in itself. Well, I think that's nonsense.
I think it will benefit more people than it inconveniences.
In what way?
It means that more people have money in their pocket to deal with things like the cost of living crisis.
But I'm in favour of people earning their living.
As a comedian who's been bankrupt and homeless and has seen hundreds of my friends struggle when even working 2 jobs, this idea is really important to me because the question underneath it is simple. What actually happens to human motivation when the floor of survival anxiety is totally removed, right? So for this, we have to start in the 1970s with a psychologist at Simon Fraser University called Bruce Alexander, at the standard model of addiction. And the actual standard model of addiction had been built years before with a famous set of experiments. And that set of experiments essentially said that if you put a rat alone in a bear cage and give it 2 bowls, one of plain water and water laced with morphine, the rat hammers the morphine, like it's an extra in Train Spotting.
50 years ago, everybody knew what caused addiction. Addiction was basically a problem of heroin and a few other drugs. We knew that for 2 reasons. One is that junkies would all tell us, oh, I can't stop. I'm not choosing this. I'm out of control. And the other thing was the rat studies. And the rat studies were done with a little box called a Skinner box. The rats would just keep taking this stuff, and eventually they'd die. They'd just forget about everything else.
And for years, that was treated as proof that the drug morphine, heroin, does that to you. Exposure equals addiction, end of story. But when Alexander looked at this, he asked the question of that experiment that nobody before had asked. What if it isn't the drug? What if it was the cage that caused that behavior?
There's something wrong with that experiment because what you're doing is you're putting a rat in solitary confinement. And of course, not everybody knows it, but rats are extremely social creatures. They're called a colonial species, meaning they're never alone. They're never in a box by themselves. And so we have rats that you test them in this box, and then when you're tired of having them in the box, you put them in a solitary cage. You essentially put them in lifelong solitary confinement, and then you're surprised that they take a lot of heroin. So, of course, the logical experiment seemed to be in those days that we'll put some rats in solitary confinement, and we'll put some rats in an ideal rat community.
So he built the rat equivalent of a decent life. No mortgage, a wife that loved it, and a bit of sawdust. The rat dream. A big enclosure, other rats, space, things to explore, room to mate and play, and be a rat. Basically, rat center parks.
Then we give them 2 water bottles, one of which contains just plain old H2O and one of which contains water with a lot of morphine in it. Now, morphine and heroin are essentially the same. But in both cases, we get the same result, which is that the rats in the cages love the morphine and they act as if they're addicted to it, whereas the ones in the cages are running around making babies and taking care of babies and all this.
The rats in the good environment drank something like 19 times less morphine than the rats in the cages. They try it, clock it, and wander off because they had better things to do, because it wasn't the rats that were broken. It was the cage. Now, obviously, a rat is not a person, but the principle travels.
Neither people nor rats have much use for heroin if they're socially integrated, if they have a happy social and personal and individual life. They're not going to do it. You can give them heroin, if you want to, in an experimental group, and they don't like it. Or you can give them heroin if they're recovering from surgery and they like it, but then as soon as the pain goes away, they don't want it anymore.
When we watch people sink into passivity, into the exact do-nothing slump that some would say is the natural human resting state, we tend to read it as human nature leaking out. Alexander's work suggests that we might be looking at something else entirely. Not what people are, but what a particular cage does to them. Unfortunately, someone else has looked into that, which takes us from rats to brains. In 2013, the behavioural economist Sendil Mullainathan and the psychologist Eldar Shafir pulled together a body of work that later became the book Scarcity, on what being short of money actually does to the mind. And I don't mean that poetically, but measurably.
When we started our work on the psychology of the poor, we entered a world where there are two main ways of thinking about decisions made by the poor. One assumed that the poor are highly rational, the way that economists think most of us are. They have high willpower, they calculate things very well. And the alternative view was a pathology view that assumed the poor are, in some senses, a culture of poverty. They're less good than the average person. They plan less well, they're less educated, they're less insightful, more impatient, etc. When we entered that world, given that we were working on decision-making in everyday life, we thought, look, there's an obvious alternative. What if the decisions made by the poor are made by people who are really like most of us? We don't think most of us are rational the way most economists assume. All of us are prone to errors and to miscalculation. What if the poor are doing the exact same thing, except that in the circumstances of poverty, of course, things often prove to be worse when you look at the outcomes?
What they found is that the mental admin of being poor, the running tally of whether there's enough, which bill waits, what happens if the car dies this week because it's sounding a bit wrong, that eats up working memory and self-control directly. And it runs in the background the way like a dozen open tabs drain a laptop battery. And one of those tabs is playing music, and you don't know which one, do you? And what's incredible is that they even put a number on it.
This is a New Jersey mall. People agree to be in a study. The study goes as follows. You sit down in front of a computer. You get small financial scenarios that highlight financial difficulties, like a car breaks down, how are you going to take care of it? While you're thinking about it, we're going to let you play some games, and then you tell us how you're going to take care of this broken car. The broken car scenario comes in two forms, easy and hard. The easy, the car is going to cost you $150 to fix, not a big deal. Even the poor can manage it in most cases. The hard is going to cost you $1,500, which is this data we have separately that we know. The average American mall goer, $1,500 is a serious challenge. So you're going to think about it, you're going to take care of this, and then go to the next scenario and you play another game. The games you play, which you think are just fun, happen to be two classic instruments that cognitive psychology has used for the last 4 decades to measure divided attention and fluid intelligence, basically a component of IQ. So in the divided attention test, you get these hearts and flowers on the screen. If you see a heart, you press on the same side. If you see a flower, you press on the opposite side. It's very confusing. On the right, you've all done this before. Given that you're here, you've all done an SAT or a GRE or something. It requires basically to fill in the shape that's best fitting in the missing picture. It's supposed to be one of the best tests to capture fluid intelligence independent of education. Okay, it's a classic test. It's used by the military, by police, by every school, etc. Let's look at cognitive control. That's divided attention. It's like a driving test. If you look at the rich, they don't care if the problems are easy or hard, they do equally well. If you look at the poor in the mall, on the easy problem, when the car costs $150 to fix, they look just like the rich. There's no difference. When the car costs $1,500 to fix, the poor people in the mall drive significantly less well. Their divided attention is gone. They're just less effective. Look at intelligence on the Raven's matrices test. The rich score equally when the car is easy or hard. The poor are indistinguishable from the rich when the car is easy. But when the poor are preoccupied with a challenging scenario, they do less well on an IQ test. If you take a standard distribution of IQ scores and accept the standard distribution where a mean is 100 and a standard deviation is 15, the effect we're getting is 13 to 14 IQ points. 13 to 14 IQ points, if you look at a qualitative scale that's typically used, is enough to take you from average to gifted, and if you go down, it's enough to take you from average to mildly deficient. That's the effect on IQ you get from the poor in the mall simply being preoccupied by financial concerns.
And the part that matters most about this, I think, is that this isn't a permanent feature of poor people. Poor people aren't doomed to be 13 IQ points stupider. No, it's a feature of the situation, because if you take the money pressure away, capacity comes back. So the next time you hear someone ask, usually not very kindly, why poor people don't just make better decisions, the honest answer is, better decisions with what exactly? Because the bandwidth those decisions need is already fully booked, running survival sums around the clock. And there's a name for the mistake being made here. Psychologists call it the fundamental attribution error. It's the glitch where, when we're sizing up someone else, we reach for character and skip straight past circumstance. He's late because he's lazy, not because his bus never came. She's skint because she makes bad choices, not because she's running impossible sums on an impossible budget. We do it on the autopilot, and it's the exact error sitting under, they'll just stop trying if we give them money. Because we look at somebody flattened by their situation and we read it as a flaw in the person. Same move as looking at a rat hammering the morphine and blaming the rat, not the cage. Hold that against the theory, because what people say is that financial pressure is the thing that makes people try. But scarcity research says the exact opposite, the reverse. Pressure doesn't generate drive. It eats the mental resources that drive lives on. If you lift the floor under someone, you hand them back that bandwidth, and it doesn't just go into doing nothing. It goes into the things that the pressure was actually crowding out. Now, the one thing that always comes in response to that is that, well, I had no safety net. I bet everything. I worked myself into the ground and it paid off. Hunger is what made me. Take away the threat and you take away the drive.
You see me in a suit on TV handing out millions of dollars, looking like another just buttoned up executive. But it wasn't always like that. You see, I had a secret tool. It was there for me when I had absolutely nothing, when I thought I was nothing, until it led me to everything. You may think it's your biggest weakness, but if you wield it properly, it will definitely be the key to your success. This is the power of growth.
And that's a powerful story, but there's a hole in that argument that the data, the actual data, walks straight through, right? So the economists Ross Levine and Yona Rubinstein looked closely at who actually becomes successful as an entrepreneur. And they found that those people come disproportionately from comfortable backgrounds. Not necessarily rich, but secure. Secure enough that a failed venture meant moving back into a spare room and not onto the street. A safety net was there. It just wasn't a government scheme. It was a family, a network, a cushion that was informal or personal or, well, more or less invisible. And this is where our psychological wiring trips us up, because we are all heroes of our own story. We remember our own choices, our nerve, the nights we didn't sleep in full technicolor. But what we do not remember with anything like the same vividness is the scaffolding that holds up our lives. And there's a name for this mental habit too, self-serving bias. We file our wins under our own effort and our setbacks under bad luck. So the graft feels earned and the scaffolding feels invisible. Like we remember the nights that we don't sleep in full Technicolor, but the friend with the spare sofa, the parents who might have caught us, the cushion that turned a catastrophe into a setback, none of that gets remembered at all with the same weight. In a more extreme way, it's like the fact that Jeff Bezos says he started Amazon from his garage. And most of us think, wow, he had a garage to start with. Like the garage is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that story. And so are his mum and stepdad, who put nearly $250,000 into Amazon to begin with. But sure, the garage. Now, it isn't dishonesty, it's just how memory and ego work. Like you feel your own agency, you just don't feel the structure that made that agency possible. They didn't succeed because there was no floor under them. A lot of them succeeded because the floor was high enough that falling didn't kill them. And they simply just never had to look down and notice it. Like for example, I was homeless for some time, but I was lucky enough that I had some sofas that I could sleep on 50% of the time. I was lucky enough that I had a friend who ran a laundrette, which meant I could look presentable if I had a job interview or something like that. I was lucky enough, actually, to look like someone to give a job to. Giving people a guaranteed floor removes the catastrophic cost of trying and failing. Make failure survivable. Yeah, put that on a hat, Trump. Because supported people take more swings, not fewer. They start more things. For people with security in life, the security isn't a sedative, it's a launch pad.
The first sort of initial startup capital for Amazon.com came primarily from my parents, and they invested a large fraction of their life savings in what became Amazon.com. He wasn't making a bet on this company or this concept. He was making a bet on his son, as was my mother.
It's not been easy for me. It has not been easy for me. And, you know, I started off in Brooklyn. My father gave me a small loan of $1 million.
Bill Gates is a computer whiz. He taught himself programming at the age of 13, was a dropout at Harvard, and started the company we've just described at the age of 19. Now 28. What are your annual revenues at Microsoft?
We're expecting to do just over $100 million this year.
You're telling me you couldn't be authentic or original or come up with some concept. No matter what you have, there's enough to do it.
Broke can break you or give you immense energy. If you're someone that refuses to lose, it's going to give you all the fuel you need to continue to push through.
The level of rejection and the heights in which we're trying to aspire to at times feel so insurmountable and crazy.
The people who were in a position to buy my book were not my target audience. So it didn't register for them.
One of my favorite sayings is try, fail, try again, fail better.
Being without capital is one of the greatest gifts you can have if you're an entrepreneur.
So when somebody says, I had no net and I made it, therefore, nets make people soft, they're reasoning, though, from half the picture. And here's the part that we don't have to argue from theory at all. Because if you want to test whether people only work under threat, there is an obvious experiment. Take the threat away. Pay people enough to survive, unconditionally, no strings, and watch what they do. And that sounds like a thought experiment, doesn't it? But it isn't, because it's been run in several countries across different economies with real controls and real money. So we don't have to guess. That's nice, isn't it? We have the data.
Finland, of all countries, is kicking off the new year by launching a new social experiment. Some 2,000 unemployed citizens chosen at random will get a guaranteed monthly income of $587, whether they work or not. Sounds like a socialist dream, doesn't it?
Finland, 2017 and 2018. 2,000 unemployed people get an unconditional monthly payment for 2 years no conditions attached. These were precisely the people that conventional wisdom says would become demotivated and sink into the sofa. Already out of work, but now paid regardless.
Okay, it seems very radical, but there are those out there that say, you know what, this may have merit. What do you say?
Well, the meritorious part of it is that the current welfare system in most countries traps people in poverty. It says, okay, we're going to give you health benefits and housing benefits and food benefits and income benefits, but you can't work. And if you start to work, we'll start taking all those goodies away from you. And so people get a clear message. The more I work, the less I get, and it traps them in poverty and is bad for the economy. So that's one of the reasons a lot of people are looking at this idea and they're intrigued. But here's the downside. What if there are people who are working and there's this guaranteed income plan for the entire country, and some people working say, hey, I'd rather just sit at home all day and watch game shows and collect this check from the government. So it's actually going to be very interesting to see what happens in Finland. I'm glad they're doing the experiment. I'm personally skeptical.
2,000 unemployed Finns given free money for 2 years. And it worked. Employment among those people edged up compared with the control group, and their well-being, mental health, and trust in institutions all rose sharply, because the predicted collapse never arrived. 2,000 unemployed Finns given free money for 2 years, and no recklessness. The most reckless they got is probably buying a marginally nicer sauna. And to be honest, is that racist? I don't know. Is that racist? Is that racist against Finnish people? I don't know. I mean, they're like saunas, right? Statistically, I haven't looked at the research. But let's just say that's true. Is it racist?
It is racist because you don't know. I mean, it is racist.
And that's not the only study. For example, there's Stockton, California, the SEED program, the SEED program, 2019 to 2021.
We're getting the first batch of data on a free money program in Stockton. It started earlier this year, providing low-income residents with $500 a month with no strings attached.
In Stockton, the program began under former Mayor Michael Tubbs, looking to help the city recover from the 2008 crash. A fifth of Stockton's residents fall below the poverty line, and residents of color are disproportionately impacted. The experiment gave $500 per month for 2 years to 125 randomly selected low-income residents, and it paid off. Recipients were less anxious and depressed over time, and compared to the control group, they saw improvements in overall well-being. They could more easily handle unexpected expenses as the pandemic began, and they obtained full-time employment at more than twice the rate of non-recipients. For single mom Lorene Paradella, the extra income helped her care for her kids and her car.
I could breathe a lot better, and being a single parent, you're always stressing over other stuff and things, you know. But I was able to sleep a lot better, I could breathe a lot better, I could concentrate on my family a lot better too.
For former Mayor Tubbs, it's no surprise.
Dignity is not attached to work first, but it's attached to humanity, and everyone does better when everyone does better. So providing a floor is something in the best interest of our country.
People used the breathing room that money gave them to leave bad jobs for better ones and to afford retraining that had been out of reach. They didn't down tools. They bought new tools and got better work. Manitoba, Canada, the Minkum experiment, 1974 to 1979, which is one of the earliest of the lot. The data, however, was left in boxes for decades until the economist Evelyn Forget, ironically called Evelyn Forget, dug it up, it probably wasn't buried, and analysed it in 2011.
It was a really unique opportunity because everybody was offered the opportunity to participate in the program. Now, the money flowed to people only if their income fell below a specified threshold level, so not everybody received the money, but they all had the opportunity to participate. A few years after that, a couple of health economists went back to look at the data to investigate in the first place whether people stopped working if they were offered a basic income. For grown-up people, there was very little response, but there were two groups of people who did reduce their work effort pretty dramatically. The first were women who tended to use the income stipend in order to finance longer maternity leaves. And so they used the income stipend to stay out of the workforce a little bit longer. But from my perspective, the much more interesting group were young unattached males, reduced the number of hours they worked really dramatically. And it turned out what was happening was that we were really talking about adolescent boys. So they'd turn 16, they'd leave school, they'd get a full-time job. When Mincome came along, a lot of those families decided that they could support their sons in school just a little bit longer. And so what we saw was a nice little increase in high school completion rates during that period. So if you're only looking at the labor market, what you see is a reduction in the number of hours worked by 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds. If you look at the other side of it, you see an increase in the number of hours spent in school by the same boys. I was particularly interested in health outcomes, quality of life. I found a very large reduction in the number of hospitalizations for people who received a basic income, and it was really quite dramatic. And when I tried to find out a little bit more, and when I tried to find out why people were spending less time in hospital, mental health really emerged as a fundamental reason. So if you think about the differences in the kind of life those people would have lived for the next 40 years, you can imagine the different opportunities those people had.
Yeah, the two groups that worked less were parents looking after small children and kids finishing their education. Just giving people money ruins their lives, and you'll be a fool and an idiot to think that would help. Okay, if you sat down to design a society on purpose, those are outcomes you would pay good money to produce, right? And here, they happened on their own, the moment people had a floor solid enough to choose them. In Kenya, Give Directly, that's been running from 2011 and is still going, is the biggest and longest basic income program on the planet. And recipients have started more businesses and bought more productive things like livestock, equipment. They've eaten more reliably. They'll only drink it prediction was tested head on with this group, and it came back empty because there was no meaningful rise in spending on alcohol or tobacco. They absolutely spunked it all on saunas. They didn't, because they won't finish. Because it turns out that when you give people with nothing some money, they buy food and livestock. The one group, actually, that reliably blows its money on booze and daft luxuries is the group that already has loads of money.
Na hiyo pesa ndo inamsaidia. Maana kama alikuwa akifukuzwa shule, anakaa kama mwezi ama wiki mbili, na pesa itakuwa ni kama 500 ndio inatakikana kule shule.
Ela nikamwona heri nimweke huku kwa mambo na kuchoma choma. Akaenda akajifunza hivyo mpaka sasa ni mtu mwenye anajisaidia kivyake.
Nahisi niko na imani kwamba nitaandikwa mahali niweze kuendelea na hiyo kazi ya welding, niweze kutengenezea familia yangu yenye naanza kwa sasa.
Hii pikipiki ilikuwa ni ya loni, ilisaidia kulipa. Inasaidia jamii wachotea maji. Mfano kilomita 20 kina mama hawezi tembea hiyo mbali. Sasa ilikuwa na wachotea, alafu give ikiingia wao wanalipa.
Pale mwanzo alikuwa na kwa 14 na sahi amekuwa number 3 ama number 2.
We have seen a great change in terms of performance. You can even see from the facial expression that this child is satisfied. Initially, we had 430 in total. After Give came to the community, the number increased to 496. That is a great impact on that, a positive one.
Different countries, different decades, wildly different economies. Wildly different, Barry. And the same result every single time. Given a floor, people do not fall through it into nothing. They stood on it and worked. The growth economy did not invent human motivation. It inherited it and then took the credit. Basically, it's the colleague that sits through the entire presentation that you do, and then at the end of the meeting goes, so what we found was curiosity, the itch to get good at hard things, the pull to crack a problem, the quiet satisfaction of having built something that works. None of that was dreamed up by capitalism. It's hundreds and thousands of years older than any jobs market. Plenty of the great natural philosophers of the Enlightenment had no financial reason to bother. The open source software that quietly runs this video that you're watching right now was written in enormous part for free by people that just simply wanted to make a thing good. The market didn't manufacture that drive. It harnessed it, and then, by swapping intrinsic reasons for cash ones, dampened the very creativity that it was trying to buy, which is one of the more reliably replicated findings in the whole motivation literature. And we've actually got a word for taking something a person loved doing and paying them until they slowly stop loving it. We do. We call it a career. Burn. So the answer that feels like plain common sense, that we work because we're afraid not to, and that people off the leash of necessity will simply stop, isn't what any of this shows. Not the cognitive research, not the motivation research, not Rat Park, not the trials in Finland, California, Manitoba, or Kenya. Now, none of this settles the policy questions, whether a basic income could be funded at national scale, or what it would do to prices, or how you design it. And those arguments are real, and we should have them. But we should have them after we've carried that one assumption out of the room. People only work because they have to. That's not a fact of nature. It's a testable claim, and it's been tested, and it keeps failing the test. It's a zombie. You can put the evidence clean through its zombie f***ing head as many times as you like, and it gets back up, and it shuffles into the next conversation as if nothing has happened. So, the next time someone tells you what human beings would do without the whip, you can tell them, we checked, they do things, they build things. So shut the fuck up. Bit much?
We're moving to a new phase of the movement, and that is a phase where we are seeking genuine equality, where we are dealing with hard economic and social issues.
We also know that no matter how dynamically the economy develops and expands, it does not eliminate all poverty. New forms of work that enhance the social good will have to be devised for those for whom traditional jobs are not available. That is a great deal that the society can and must do. We must create incomes. People must be made consumers by one method or the other. We must develop progress that will drive the nation to a guaranteed annual income. Early in the century, this proposal would have been greeted with ridicule and denunciation as destructive of initiative and responsibility. The poor, transformed into purchasers, will do a great deal on their own to alter housing decay. Now, one of the answers, it seems to me, is a guaranteed annual income, a guaranteed minimum income for all people and for all families of our country. Once they are placed in this position, we need to be concerned that the potential of the individual is not wasted. A host of positive psychological changes inevitably will result from widespread economic security. The dignity of the individual will flourish when the decisions concerning his life are in his own hands, when he has the assurance that his income is stable and certain, and when he knows that he has the means to seek self-improvement. Personal conflicts between husband, wife, and children will diminish when the unjust measurement of human worth on a scale of dollars is eliminated.